Pongal, Makar Sankranti, and Tirumuri to all the delegates and the entire fraternity present here. It's good to see that a long wait for the whole nation is over since vaccination has been started, a much needed and a big stride in the war against COVID-19. But at the same time, cautioned by our Prime Minister to take preventive measures as it will take some more time to reach the last point. With this good note, let's start today's panel discussion on nuances of Indian English literature. In the 21st century, at this platform of iSPELL, focusing on the tenets of Indian literature. May I request all the participants to mute themselves? May I proceed, ma'am?
Yes, please.
With this good note, let's start today's panel discussion, focusing on the tenets of English language and literature. It is the 18th event of iSPELL, and as always, we have wonderful educationists amongst us for today's panel discussion. Our panelists are Dr. Sridevi Salvaraj, Dr. Pratibha Kumar, Dr. Jaideep Chakravarti, and we have with us Mr. Ranjan Devnath as our chairperson, and Dr. Meenakshi Kulkarni as today's Master of Ceremony. And indeed, it's an honor to have with us the two strong pillars of iSPELL, Dr. Jyoti Patil, President of iSPELL, and Dr. G.A. Ghanshyam, General Secretary of iSPELL. I welcome all the delegates and participants on behalf of iSPELL. iSPELL, Indian Society for the Promotion of English Language and Literature, created by the Fraternity of English to uplift and upgrade themselves in the field of English language and literature, with the vision, facilitate to elevate. iSPELL got inaugurated virtually on 5th September 2020 on the occasion of Teachers' Day. Since inception, iSPELL India is committed in organizing events to enrich the teachers by providing an interactive platform packed with experts. In the short span of time, we have traveled a lot on this learning path and reached to this 18th session of iSPELL. Let us all unmute for a moment to have a big round of applause for ourselves, and let's create an energy on this great platform. I request all to unmute themselves to have a big round of applause. Now, may I request all the participants to mute themselves so as to proceed with the program. We have with us Dr. Meenakshi Kulkarni as the Master of Ceremony for today's session. Dr. Meenakshi Kulkarni is fully devoted to her job with LAD and Srimati RP College for Women, Nagpur, as an assistant professor in English literature, with the zeal to contribute in her own way towards molding the future generation positively. She is MA, MPhil, PhD, Public Administration. She is MEd, MA English, SET English Maharashtra, and PhD English Literature. Her areas of interest include Indian writing in English, gender studies, Irish literature, post-colonialism, and subaltern studies. Her keen interest in research work has kept her on toes to write research papers and articles, which have been published in national and international journals. She has attended many seminars and conferences. She has authored a book, Poetic Creativity of Seamus Heaney, a critic. She wants to work for the upliftment of the downtrodden in society, for which, being the NSS program officer of the college, Unit 2, has given her ample opportunity. She is also a paper setter and examiner of undergraduate courses for English and communication skills at Rashtra Sant Tukhtuji Maharaj, Nagpur University. Indeed, it's a pleasure to have such a wonderful and versatile personality as today's Master of Ceremony. Before I hand over this session to Dr. Meenakshi Kulkarni, I would like to throw light on few points to be followed. All the participants have to be muted themselves while the session is in progress. And for today's panel discussion, each speaker will be given maximum 20 minutes of time. Now, let me hand over this platform to Dr. Meenakshi Kulkarni. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rakhi Makhija, for your kind words. Good evening, luminaries and literature lovers, to a very scholarly panel discussion on nuances of Indian English literature in the 21st century, organized by iSPELL. English literature has started and flourished in England and sowed the creativity of English in other parts of the world. When the colonizer went to different parts of the world like America, Caribbean islands, Australia, India, they initiated writing their literature of that particular place. Thus, the birth of Indian English literature took place. Indian English literature, also referred to as Indian writing in English, is the body of work by writers in India who write in the English language and whose native or co-native language could be one of the numerous languages of India. The panel discussion is the 18th literary event being organized by iSPELL India, focusing on the tenets of English language and literature. It is my honor to introduce our first panelist, Dr. Sridevi Selvaraj. Dr. Sridevi Selvaraj is the principal of Chevalier T. Thomas Elizabeth College for Women, University of Madras. She is a creative writer and a poet in Tamil and English language. She has published many collections of poetry in Tamil. Prominent are Adupadi, Kavidai Gail, Navashivam, Pen Ennam Peranthi, and Erkard. Her English poetry collections is Reservations. She has translated many prominent works from Tamil to English. Tirukad, Part 1 Values, New Tender Leaves, selections from the poem of Yaini Munusamy. She has published many research papers in national and international journal of repute. She has authored many books, to name a few: An Introduction to Western Civilization, Plato, translated into Tamil, Communicative English for Engineers, Political Philosophy, A Student's Guide, Part 1 and Part 2. The topic for the panel discussion today is Contemporary Indian Poetry, Indian Tradition and Modernism, poems of K. Sadashivan. Sridevi ma'am, I request you to please enlighten the audience.
Yeah. Thank you, iSPELL. I am really honored, and it's a privilege to meet scholars like you all. When Dr. Jyoti Patil approached me through Dr. Padmaja Iyengar, I immediately agreed because I have lots of respect for the Padmaja Iyengar ma'am. And Padmaja Iyengar ma'am told me that it's a very, very scholarly forum where I'll meet lots of intellectuals and I can share my thoughts with them. And I'm so grateful to Dr. Jyoti Patil for sending me umpteen emails and WhatsApp messages, following me up and making today possible. And thank you one and all. I'm not very comfortable with Hindi, but I am comfortable with English. And this is the book that I am talking about today. It is written by late Mr. Sadashivan. Probably was writing for more than 20, 30 years in Tamil Nadu. He was a very prominent member of Chennai Poets Circle. He passed away last year, and his family published his poems posthumously, and he has been published widely all over the world. Can I share my screen?
Yes, please, madam. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, you can share this screen.
This is K. Sadashivan. This is during the book launch of this particular book. We got this photograph. It's there in the Facebook. 1933 to 2019. So we can locate him as a post-independent thinker and writer. And this is from one of his poems. And before that, let me go back to his biography. He was interested in English literature and poetry, and his poems were published in several literary magazines, including the illustrious monthly magazine Poet, Amravati Poetic Prism 2018, Met Verse Muse. One of his verses was published in the Deccan Chronicle, and it won a cash prize. His poems have been selected for publishing and recording by the International Library of Poetry, USA. He was also awarded the Editor's Choice Award by the managing editor of the International Library of Poetry, USA. He was a senior grade accounts supervisor, Tamil Nadu Electricity Board. So writing was his hobby. What is special about Sadashivan's poetry, and how is it relevant to Indian writing in English? That is the question I took up when I was preparing after Dr. Jyoti Patil spoke to me, and I have been reading his poems multiple times. The interesting thing is that these poems are written in English, of course, but they contain the traditional values, concepts, especially from the South, social equality, which is a very dominant theme in Tamil Nadu, in its politics and its ideologies, generosity, and he is celebrating the life of a common man, how simple people live. For example, the beggar, a lonely couple, a farmer, a boy who finds mathematics very difficult, theater actors, fishermen, garbage trucks, buses, trains, cricket, all these variety of normal experiences are captured by him. So the poems we see are reflections of a middle class intellectual who's comfortable with both the languages, English and Tamil, but who's translating these local experiences into an alien tongue. So that consciousness is there in his writings. I think even R.K. Narayan, when he was writing, I'm sure all of us remember, most of the time he would address his writings to the Westerners. For example, if he says Lakshmi, then he will put a comma and say goddess of wealth. So the writings were addressing the foreign readers. Contemporary Indian poetry in English does not do that. Indian writing does not explain anymore, because it is no more writing for the foreign reader. These English poems are addressing fellow Indians. So that is, I think, a very, very special quality of the second half of 20th century. When we write in English, we no more address a British citizen or an American. We are addressing fellow Indians. So what has happened is we have brought in a lot of local experiences, and we have been attempting to convert them into art. In these poems, you will see the reality of a life lived in Tamil Nadu. Using English words, the poet has captured these experiences, but this English is very different we can perhaps call it Indian English. So the idioms are most of the time local, the nuances are local, and sometimes when he uses, say a British idiom, it doesn't fit in exactly. So this conflict I found in his poems, and in this learned platform, I would present this as one of the ambiguities of modern Indian mind, which is caught between the tradition and another language, which is now a global language. So I think we as poets, as thinkers, we have arrived at a balance. We have uh, uh, we have been striving to arrive at some kind of a mediation, that we have evolved a different kind of a language which addresses our own people across the states. So maybe we can call it pan-Indian English. So today English has become a medium for us to communicate our ideologies across our states. Another special quality of his writings is the self-analysis, the self-questioning, which reveals a subtle mind, and he is gently searching for answers. So this detached tone is there in all his poems, as if he is commenting on himself. So it is this quality that attracted me to his writings. So the poems emerge as philosophical sayings now and then, teaching us objectivity, teaching us a kind of a spirituality, a kind of a detachment. He doesn't resign himself but accepts the way the world is. And through his poems, we learn how he has explored and lived in the last part of his life without frustration and bitterness. So, this is something beautiful, I thought. As an ideology, this is very, very Indian. Living the life of a detached person, something like a rishi, like Janaka Maharishi, the Raja Rishi, who was involved in active life, but who was also detached from it. I would perhaps point out that this is a special feature of the Indian mind, and when Indian intellectuals are writing in English, it stands out separately. It is very different from the kind of ideologies presented by, say, Tennyson, who says, strive, go on, go win. The 19th century narrative poetry talks about optimism. Optimism can be interpreted as search for power, search for colonization. So when we compare Indian writing in English, especially Mr. Sadashivan's poems, we realize they are carrying the Indian ethos of detachment. Personally, I was very impressed with this tone, which is there in all his poems. And then I was thinking about, say, the 5 centuries of British poetry. And I was thinking of how Europe actually does not talk about detachment. It carries ideologies of searching, whether it is Odysseus or whether it is Ulysses. There is always this quest for knowledge, quest for something, searching for something. Whereas the Indian quest seems to be very different. The Indian poet is searching for himself. He wants to find out who he is. He wants to stand away from life. He wants to question his stand. So this objectivity, when you read in English, it's very interesting. So I would say that this language, global language, English language, has been now customized by the Indian mind to express its own philosophy. For example, in most of his poems, uh, Sadasivan would project the metaphor of a door. The door has to be open. He doesn't understand why doors have to be closed. And he makes comments after comments. Now, the door, if you take as a part of architecture, a closed door, you realize, is a symbol of Western life, cold climate. You have to keep the doors closed, individual bedrooms and so on. The architecture of the home of a Western country and the architecture of an Indian home. Sadashivan is earning to bring back the Indianness, the Indian open door culture, Aditi Devo Bhava. The door has to be open. And he says we have to live in a brotherly manner and live harmoniously. The hospitality, Virundombal, Tirukural talks a lot about it. It is a Tamil cultural value. The guest has to be honored. And we see this culture all over the country. Aditi Devo Bhava. The guest is the god. So you can't close the door against him. This is a poem. I think I have taken the first answer from the poem, Detached. The name of the poem is Detached. You will see how he is questioning himself. He has located himself as a writer who's writing in English. His poems are not translations. He wrote directly into English language. And as he is writing, you see he's questioning himself. To be a poet, should one be a scholar? So that's the first question. So who is the Indian English writer? Should he be a professor of English? Should he be an academician? Can only academicians write Indian writing in English, poems and novels? See, he was an accountant. You see, his poems are full of commerce terminologies. So that is the first question he is asking. Should we have a degree in English literature to write poetry? And then he says, one writes to please himself. This is the Epicurean philosophy. You live to please. Carpe diem. You please yourself and you please others. So this is the fundamental purpose of art. Art has to heal by pleasing. So aesthetically, we write for ourselves and for pleasing others. We cannot expect much from one for whom tongue English is alien. He is not comfortable with English. That's what the poems tell us. He says, I am not comfortable with English. Now we have to ask a question. In that case, why did he write in English? Why would one want to write in English if you are not comfortable with that language? I think that is where the social changes come in. We have come through English education and English has become part of our cultural heritage now. So certain expressions can be done only through English. So this kind of questioning comes throughout his poems. This is another poem. The title is It Winter? This is on the farmer, a simple rural life. The farmer leads. The soil and the seeds are his dire needs. Completely different from a Western farmer. Western farmer. So in India, the farmer is poor. In abject poverty, he lives. These kind of descriptions fill the book. He describes beggars. He describes farmers like this. He describes poor people. Now, what is Indian writing in English? So when Indians are writing about, describing about their state of affairs in a language that can be understood all over the world, we start wondering something like, is it another Slumdog Millionaire? Why are we writing about all these things? The same thing had been in our own languages, then we would have felt a little bad. So this is another complexity. Indian writing in English has to take up. White Tiger, for example, how does it present India? Or Satyajit Roy's movies, how do they project India? So this is a role from which Indian writers cannot escape. This is the reality, and we live in this reality, and every writer ultimately has to deal with it, whether we like it or not. I have one more poem. This is about racism. Dusky in complexion, is by birth not white, he may talk English. This is the post-independent India. Post-independent India suddenly realized that its skin is dark. Already there was a racism here, but now so-called fair skin is also considered dark by the rest of the world. So India suddenly faces a different kind of a problem, identity. Who are we? Who are we? We are brown. So what does that mean? We are low, low. And the title of the poem is very positive. It is Future Never Dies. This I would call is post-colonial in nature. How did India take its colonial experience? How did Africa take its colonial experience? India has taken up the colonial experience, learned the language, faced the challenges, customized the experience, used the language, and it is bringing back the traditional values into this colonial language. This is another poem where he is ironical. Apart from his simplicity, apart from his objectivity, there is a touch of irony also in his poems where he makes fun of himself. He's making fun of himself saying, see, I am not Shakespeare. I can't write like Shakespeare. I would try to write whatever I want to write. I am only a poet taster. So that's the statement. Something like a ideological statement. Look, we are Indians. We have learnt your language. We cannot write it like you. We cannot speak it like you. But we would still continue to write, and we are not going to not write. So this is a statement from a writer. The previous question that I raised, why are we writing in English? This is the answer given by Sadashivan. Because this language has become part of us, so we will continue to write. This is my last slide. What do these poems have? What does contemporary Indian poetry in English talk about? First of all, the thoughts are Indian. We have stopped imitating. Nobody is now writing about Western idioms or Western metaphors. The second part of 20th century, we have become completely Indian. And then what did India do? India has customized its traditions. It has made English language a tool. Gandhi and Nehru, of course, used it as a political tool. And our people and we are continuing to use it as a tool. And we are presenting India. We are presenting India in traditional outlook. We are presenting, we are probably even representing India. We have started the processes there in almost most of these young writers who have started writing. India is now repackaged in its traditionality. And now today's English in Indian English is apolitical in the sense it is no more King's English or Queen's English. It has come out of that kind of a framework, and as David Crystal points out, it has become Indianized, English with a small e. Then migrations. When people migrate in the name of colonization, what happens? Cultural interactions definitely take place. So you see, in a lot of places, writers who are writing in English originally think in their mother tongue, and they translate that into English. So there is a transaction that takes place. So when you take Indian writing in English poems, and if you know the original mother tongue of that author, we will definitely find out how these transactions are taking place. And finally, as we all know, these English poems, English novels have brought all of us together. It has linked us, a South Indian like me, with all of you. It has become a pan-Indian language. Thank you for the interesting session. I think that's it.
Thank you so much, Sridevi Madam, for introducing us to K. Sadashivan, a great poet, writing on variety of local experiences and themes, and carrying the Indian ethos of detachment. And you lucidly explain the various topics dealt by the erudite poet. Thank you so much, Madam.
Thank you.
It is my privilege to introduce the next panelist, Dr. Pratibha Kumar. Dr. Pratibha Kumar is the head and professor of English Department, Government, Autonomous Mahakoshal Arts and Commerce College, Jabalpur, MP. She has been awarded PhD in English Literature on D.B. Gabriel Rossetti. She is a professor of English, served for 24 years in Department of MP, India. She is a member, Research Advisory Committee, Rani Durgavati University, Jabalpur, MP. She is the principal investigator in University Grants Commission Minor Research Project from 2003 to 2006. She is a research supervisor of English and has 10 registered scholars. 5 students have been awarded PhD under her. She's a visiting professor in Indian schools and international universities. She was convener and has chaired delivered plenary and keynote addresses in national and international conferences. She has published 20 research papers, articles, and 2 books. She was appointed as screening committee subject expert in selection of lecturers and professors in the Department of Higher Education. She has worked as convener of Legal Cell of Government, Higher Education, convener of various community services such as Red Cross Society and Self-Defense Program. She is a commissioned officer, lieutenant in National Cadet Corps, Armed Forces for college students. The topic that she's going to deal with today is mimicry and hybridity in Indian English literature. I welcome you, Madam.
Am I audible? Am I audible,
Yes.
ma'am?
Yes, yes, very clear. Yes,
thank you. Thank you so much. At the onset of my talk, I would like to thank and also congratulate Dr. Patil, who's the president of the program. And I would really like to thank Dr. Ghansham Iyengar, who has always been a motivating force behind me. To begin with, the idea of this very, very disputed topic came to me way back in 2016 when my son had he had actually migrated to United States of America in New York. And when he came back after a year from New York, we were all expecting him to be completely transformed into a person whom I had never imagined. I thought when he would come back, he would be, having a different accent altogether. He would have been, imitating his colleagues out there and things like that. So when he came back after a year, we said, Anmol, you haven't changed a lot. What has happened to you? I was thinking you will be changing your life altogether. He said, Mom, has Gandhiji changed? I was shocked when he compared himself to Mahatma Gandhi. I said, he said that he had gone to the Western countries, but he did imbibe the qualities of the Western culture, but he did not change at all. So Ma, why should I change? Now, this particular statement of his made me shocked. And then came these two terms before me. I had always restricted myself for studying literary criticism, and especially these two terms, mimicry and hybridity. But then I came to the conclusion from today onwards, I'm going to study these topics and I'm going to make these topics simpler for my students as well. So this is a very, very dreadful topic. This is very, very challenging. And in fact, this is one topic which is most, disputed term, especially hybridity in post-colonial theories. So when these two terms are, when we come across these two terms, when these two terms are invoked in literary criticism, there is usually a footnote which leads us to two of the essays by Homi Bhabha. Of course, these two essays all must be familiar with, of Mimicry and Man and Signs Taken for Wonders. Questions of Ambivalence and Authority Under a Tree Outside Delhi, May 1817. So these are the two topics that we are generally led towards. When we read these two topics or refer to these two essays of Homi K. Bhabha, we get a little more confused. So my aim today is just to make these two terms very simple enough for us to understand and just define these two terms and then, referring it into plain English using references from specific cultural contexts as well as literature itself. From such an interesting topic of modern poetry to this topic, let me give you some of the examples right away. So what is mimicry? And my actually hope is to provide a starting point for initiating conversations about these concepts that might lead to a more productive discussion than Bhabha's essay. This is not an attack on him, but yes, we would like to make it much more simpler. So let's start with mimicry, which I think is little more easier than the two concepts. Mimicry in colonial and post-colonial literature is most commonly seen when members of a colonized society, you can say Indians or Africans, they imitate the language, dress, politics, or cultural attitude of their colonizers, say Britishers or the French. Now, under this colonialization, in the context of immigration, mimicry is seen as an opportunistic pattern of behavior. One copies the person who is in power, and for a while, he feels that he becomes powerful himself. So we presume that while you are copying the master, one has to intentionally suppress one's own cultural identity. Though in some of the cases, the immigrants and colonial subjects are left so confused by their own cultural encounter with a dominant foreign culture that they have gone into. So their identity is suppressed. Now, what is mimicry? Mimicry is often seen as something which is shameful. Why shameful? Because a person is engaging in mimicry, he is usually derided by others, and by others or the members of the group generally for doing so. Though mimicry, is a very, very important concept in thinking about the relationship between the colonizing and the colonized peoples. And many people have historically been derided as mimics or mimic men. So it is interesting that almost no one ever describes themselves as positively engaged in mimicry. So it is always that someone else is doing that, and it is actually related to other person. So that is why it is derided. Or it can also be said like this, that one is mocking the other, or seemingly, he gets transformed when mimicry is frequently invoked with reference to the Bintu. Bintu, someone who has traveled to the West and then returned home, a complete transformed self. So 4 major works that come into my mind while I talk of this particular theme that is invoked in the critical theory or modern critical theory is Burmese Days by George Orwell, that is set in Burma, The Inheritance of Laws by Kiran Desai, The Mimic Men by V.S. Naipaul, and Karma by Kushwant Singh. So these 4 main works, if you just read them, we would come to know how mimicry is invoked here. Then, if you go to read Sitzi and African writers' novel called Nervous Conditions, you see there that it has a lot of central problems there in the novel, and the characters in Nervous Conditions who have not had the same kind of experience to travel in the West find that their desire of those who have returned to impose their English values, language, and religion on everyone else bewildering and offensive. So it is the story of a Black woman who has now been placed after her co-brother to complete her higher education in the West. The parents are disturbed, the mother is disturbed, and the mother thinks that taboo will, when come back to the country, will be a total transformed personality. So mimicry of Baba has actually described mimicry as sometimes unintentionally rebellious also and subversive also. So now let us understand what Baba wants to say to us. So Baba says that actually Homi Baba has derived these concepts of mimicry and hybridity from the 2 philosophers and a psychologist, Sigmund Freud, and the 2 philosophers, Jacques Lacan and Jacques Derrida. My husband is a lawyer in Mumbai High Court, and when he was called to deliver a lecture on Jacques Lacan, he being a writer as well, he took some 6 months to read this philosopher called Jacques Lacan. He was invited by a professor, Dr. Urvashi Bharat, emeritus professor of the university, to deliver a lecture. And when the name of Jacques Derrida comes, the slogan, or we could say a phrase, deconstructive reading, comes to our mind. Now, Bhaba's way of thinking actually is a little complex, I must say, because he says that mimicry is a kind of performance that exposes the artificiality of all symbolic expressions of power. So, in other words, if an Indian desiring to mimic the English becomes obsessed with some particular codes associated with Englishness, his performance of those codes might show how hollow the codes really are. So, it is really hard to think that to get an example from post-colonial literature where this very particular kind of subversion is in effect. There is another much more straightforward way in which mimicry can actually be subversive or empowering, when it involves the copying of Western concepts of justice, freedom, and the rule of law. An example we can see is from E.M. Foster's A Passage to India, when Mr. Amrit Rao, who's a lawyer from Calcutta, whom the British Anglo-Indians dread, they dread him not because he's unfair, or indeed what is threatening about him is precisely the fact that he's learned about enough of the principles of British law, but to realize that they are afraid because he has been foreign educated, English-speaking Indian lawyer in colonial India, and he might be mocked as a mimic man or a babu. But it may be that mockery covers over a defensive fear that the British legal system is not quite fair as it should be. So we can see an example of Mahatma Gandhi here. When you read Mohandas Karamchand Gandhiji, he is a symbol of Indian asceticism and simplicity. But he has imbibed the culture of Western countries. But still, if you just see his figure in front of you, he's dressed up in khadi, in an Indian dress, an Indian fabric, and along with his progressive Western concepts of socialism that he has in him. Through Gandhi's Indian nationalism, which may have been started as a derivative of nationalism in the West, became something distinctly and uniquely Indian. So his masses were definitely influenced by Gandhi. We were all influenced by Gandhi, no doubt. Now, this is mimicry in plain English language. And these are some of the examples that you can go through because we have been assigned only 20 minutes. Reverse mimicry is another thing that is very, very important to know for us. Like we have been copying the West, right? So it is sometimes the West also that they copy us. The British subjects we see them disguising themselves as Indians and Africans too. So this is reverse mimicry. In literature, we can have an example of Rudyard Kipling's Kim, where Kipling invents a white child, the son of an Irish soldier in British India, who grows up wild, as it were, on the streets of Lahore, outside of the reach of British society. Let's come down to a more complex term called hybridity. Though this usage of this term hybridity is quite original, and Bhabha's terminology is closely derived from ideas and terminology from Freud and French thinkers Jacques Derrida and Jacques Lacan, as I told you earlier, I do respect the sophistication of Bhabha's thinking, and following is not actually is an attack on him, on his work. It is only an explanation, and for our teaching purposes, hybridity is supposed to be a simpler term. See, the more you study a particular subject, the more you go closer to it. And the more you get far from it, the more you get far from the subject. Hence, this delving into hybridity made me really, it pleased my heart, and I'm enlightened. So in contrast to mimicry, which is relatively it has a very fixed and a limited idea, post-colonial hybridity can be quite slippery and broad. At a basic level, hybridity refers to any mixing of East and Western culture, and this is a term that has been derived from biology and botany, where two flowers, are cultured and a hybrid plant takes place. Bhabha, being a biologist himself, a nuclear physicist himself, a scientist himself, naturally could be thinking something new and innovative in his philosophical thinkings of literature and literary theories. So, with due respect to Homi Bhabha, first of all, he says it is a subversive tool. And secondly, it says that it has challenged various forms of oppression. And Bible, he says, it has become the Bible of the modern theories of English literature. Now, I'll give you an example of my family here before proceeding to something very hard to understand. Hybridity is defined as cultural mixing in general, and it does not help us explicitly to account for the many different paths by which someone can come to embody a mix of Eastern and Western attributes. Nor does it differentiate between people who have consciously striven to achieve a mixed or balanced identity and those who accidentally reflect it. Let me give you an example of my family here. My husband, he is a Punjabi, and he behaves like a Maharashtrian. I would say like a Mumbaikar, as he has mixed with many cultural groups, such as Sikhs, Kachhi Gujaratis, Maharashtrians, Sindhis, Muslims, and including Khoja, Shia, Sunni, and Bori Muslims, and studied from school and college run by Jesuit missionaries and having many Christian friends. The blend of cultural integration and interplay can be seen not only in his conduct, but I would say among most Mumbaikars, like blended tea or blended whiskey. Excuse me, I have to say this because until unless I give quote examples like this, I will not be able to make you or we all understand the concept of hybridity. So, what is hybridity? Hybridity can be defined this way also by, telling it as an awkward term to describe people who are racially mixed, such as Eurasians in the British Raj in India, or biracial or multiracial people all around the post-colonial world. Though it is commonly deployed in the context of Indian or African societies that take on influences from the West. One needs to account for how hybridity, like mimicry, can run in reverse. As I told you, reverse mimicry and reverse hybridity. How can this run? I actually consider that hybridity and mimicry go hand in hand together. But when I came at the end of the lesson and when I wanted to conclude my things, I thought they have either ways to go. So, reverse hybridity, that is to say, it can describe how Western cultures can be inflected by Asian and African elements as well. You can call it chutney fight or you can call it bhel puri. The mixing of all things together. Finally, it seems important to note that there can be very different registers of hybridity, from slight mixing to very aggressive instances of cultural clash. So let me directly now come down to the types of hybridities, generally, which I have named as RRLLC. R standing for, it's an acronym that I have made so that I don't forget it. R standing for racial hybridity, which has been derived from biology, as I said, where there is the merger of two genetic streams. And to be more precise, you can say that most formerly, colonial societies have their very specific localized words to describe people of mixed race ancestry. And the term hybrid is generally not used in the context of race here, because that would make a little offensive. In the Indian context, for example, there is an established community called the Eurasians, who were marked as separate community of the British after interracial marriages were banned, and who as a result held themselves as a clearly demarcated community. So, and in Latin America, the term mestizo is often used to describe people of mixed European, African, and Native American descent. The idea of racial hybridity today actually seems awkward in large part because it clearly relies on the idea inherited from 19th century race science that racial difference is an empirically verifiable reality. So, in fact, it is unclear that racial markers such as African or Asian have any precise meaning to it. So, now, I hope I have made the racial hybridity clear. I think, well be, giving an example of Kamala Harris being an Indian and being the Vice President of United States of America. Coming down to linguistic hybridity. Linguistic hybridity, as the name itself suggests, can refer to elements from foreign languages that enter into a given language. whether it's the adoption of English words into Asian or African languages, or the advent of Asian or African words into English. To talk about linguistic hybridity, one benefits from reference to terms from linguistics, including the ideas of pidgin and dialect. You know what is pidgin? Pidgin is khichdi bhasha. When some words are taken from some language, some words are taken from some language, and it's made into a khichdi or a dialect, you can say. So, over the course of the long history of British colonialism in India, quite a number of Indian words entered into British speech. Anglo-Indians. Now, amongst the Anglo-Indians, if you see, you have broad terms as they had been using as pajamas, bungalows, multi-gateways, and mumbo-jumbo. So these are the little nuances of linguistic hybridity. I would rush fast and escape some of the very vital points that I had written because then it would take a lot of time. We all know Chinua Achebe, and Chinua Achebe is a writer who has said, I quote him, that there is a problem there, that if somebody does not know, does not have a mastery over English language, then he or she should not write. I quote him. For an African, writing in English is not without its serious setbacks. He often finds himself describing situations or modes of thought which have no direct equivalent in English way of life. Yes, true. Lingua franca. Caught in that situation, he can do one of two things. He can try and contain what he wants to say within the limits of conventional English, or he can try to push back those limits to accommodate his ideas. I submit that those who can do the work of extending the frontiers of English so as to accommodate African thought patterns must do it through their mastery of English and not out of innocence. Unquote. There are various examples of linguistic hybridity that I can just give it to you. The palm wine drinkard, then James Joyce's portrait of the artist as a young man, and so on. We have the Kenyan novelist Ngugi wa Thiong'o, who has set his career in writing in English. And there are various other examples. Coming down to the third type of hybridity, which is literary hybridity, or you can say post-colonial literature in the narrative form. In part, actually basic modern literary forms such as the novel and the short stories, they have been acquired from the West. These modes of writing especially have been acquired from the West. And they have been adopted by the colonial authors in Africa and Asia. So literary hybridity is something which is immediately emerged by the Indians, and the Africans and Asians began to collectively imagine a sense of national and cultural identity. Salman Rushdie, yes, has experimented on it, and he has got a number of novels written. Midnight's Children is one novel, an instance of literary hybridity. The Ramayana, how can we forget the Ramayana? The Ramayana is an example of literary hybridity. It's a self-reflexive narrative frame, actually. So these three examples, I think, suffice. Now here, I remember something of, Aga Shahid Ali's concept of an English language ghazal. And Shahid Ali as a Kashmiri poet writing in English and living in the United States, wanting to legitimize his own efforts by composing ghazals in English. Yes, it has to do with magic realism. Coming down to cultural hybridity, then you know that ghazal can be form of a villanelle or a sonnet. So coming down to cultural hybridity. Thank you, Nurul. Culture defined. Yes.
Pratibha ma'am, sorry to interrupt, but
yes.
Can you please wind up? Actually,
sure.
Sure.
I just wind up, ma'am. Give me 2 to 5 minutes.
Yeah. Thank you.
So cultural hybridity, as we all know, it is a defined term of a mixture of art, music, fashion, cuisine, and so on. Cultural hybridity. You know, I can give you an example of cultural hybridity of my son, wearing a dhoti and a kurta at the convocation of his university program. So that would look very odd. But then this is an example of cultural hybridity. Even E.M. Foster's A Passage to India, it clearly admires the very ambitious Indians. And the example of British Raj and Dr. Aziz dresses up quite easily like an Englishman. So these are some of the examples. So I think many of us will agree that hybridity and mimicry are close cousins, holding hands together but want to go in different directions. Coming down to the last point of religious hybridity, which I think is very, very important. This is the final subcategory of hybridity. And I will mention, it is very necessary for me to mention that it seems important in any case that religion, specifically those religions, those people who have converted themselves from Hindus to Christians, some Indians who have converted themselves from Hindus to Christians, and in such, and is such a widespread theme, this has also been given in Homi Bhabha's hybridity in a book called Signs Taken from Wonders, for Wonders. Many of the Hindu leaders have formed societies such as Brahma Samaj and the Sikh tradition, Arya Samaj, Singh Baba movement. All these are examples of religious hybridity. So I hope my topic was interesting. My only effort was to, do a brainstorming session, and that we can, be more, these two terms can be more easier for us to assimilate in our writings. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Pratibha Kumar. It was a very lucidly explained session, very interesting session. The two most widely used terms, mimicry and hybridity, was very well dealt with you in post-colonial literature. Thank you so much, ma'am. And you also told us to take pride in our nationality and be deep-rooted in our culture. By giving tasty examples, chutney-fied and bhelpuri, you have made the discussion scholastic, that is scholarly plus tasty. And you've given us plethora of examples for us to work on. And the various category of hybridity which you have given will always be etched in our memory. Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you, madam.
And ma'am, sorry, I was not able to update my biodata when I was sending it. It has already been a period of 28 years. This is the 29th year running of my services to MP government, higher education. Thank you.
So I rectified. It was not 24 years, but 29 years.
Yeah. And recently, I was invited to US to deliver a lecture on, I spoke on Dalit literature, and I was felicitated by the MP Higher Education Additional Director for being an English professor who went out, who was invited and took this challenge and spoke on a very, very sensitive topic. It is on the YouTube, ma'am.
Congratulations, ma'am. We are really honored to have you. Thank you, ma'am. Now it is my honor to introduce the next panelist, Dr. Jaydeep Chakrabarti. Dr. Chakrabarti is an assistant professor in the Department of English, Assam University. Prior to joining Assam University, he worked as a UGC Junior Research Fellow in the Department of English, Divburgar University. His doctoral dissertation is entitled Culture and the Canon, Edward Said and the Great Tradition. He has an experience of teaching postgraduate classes in English for 17 years. He has guided PhD and MPhil research scholars in English studies for almost a decade. His area of interests include critical theory, Commonwealth and post-colonial literature, men's studies, and queer studies. Some important books written by him include Post-Colonialism, Canonicity and Culture, Essays in Memory of Edward Said, the English Department, Essays in English, Essays in Literary and Cultural Studies, Edward Said and the Great Tradition, the English Literary Canon. He has edited 2 books titled Bukra Musings, a selection of poems and short stories, Kolkata, Macaulay's Ghost, English Studies in a Post-Globalized World. Besides, there are several publications in university and college journals of repute and book chapters as well. The topic which he'll be discussing today is contemporary non-fiction in Indian English literature. We welcome you, sir.
Thank you so much, madam. Can you hear me? Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Thank you, madam. And
Thank you,
for
sir.
your kind words. I wish all of you a very good evening. And I was delighted to be in the company of such great peers and scholars. I would first of all like to thank iSPELL for honoring me with the opportunity to speak, in this August gathering. And intentionally, I chose to speak about non-fictional prose because that area often gets neglected. In the classical, or rather very classic history of Indian writing in English, I'm talking about the second one, M.K. Naik's book. It was complete only up to say 80s. So later they brought out a sequel, M.K. Naik along with Shamala Narayan in around 2001. This is the book, I'm sorry, this is in the self-image, can't help it. So there they identified drama as the Cinderella of Indian English, literature. But I would contend that this is not drama, but prose. And in fact, another companion volume in a way, a concise history of Indian literature in English in this book. There is no discussion of contemporary prose actually. There is a chapter called 5 Nature Writers, and earlier writers have been discussed like Nirotsi, Ram Mohan Roy, and Jawaharlal Nehru. Also, this is a good book, but there is no contemporary prose in English as such. Now, coming to my next point, I understand that as nature of things are in this one, time is limited. So as Marvel had said, at my back I always hear Triumph's winged chariot hurrying near. I cannot do everything of it. It's a huge area. And I would also say that initially I had decided that I would give an inventory kind of thing of contemporary Indian writing in English so far as its prose genre is concerned, but that is not simply going to happen in 18 minutes. And in any case, that is there in Wikipedia. So I believe in such occasions, it is also important to demonstrate what we bring to it, our interpretation. That way, my previous esteemed speaker has also demonstrated nicely. I mean, it was not exactly what Bhava said only, but how she interpreted. So that is how things should be. So I would like to pick and choose a few important texts. And then, because I understand that majority of our viewers would be students also, it is primarily for their help. I would pick and choose a few important texts of contemporary Indian writing in English, and discuss some important points of departure or points of entry, either ways would like to call them, in those. So, uh, first of all, I mean, since the previous speech was on Bhava, possibly it's a happy coincidence, I would start with Spivak, Gayatri Spivak. Now, if we go purely technically, there would be a question of nationalism, whether she is exactly Indian or whether she is American. But I believe literature gives us that freedom. Literature is not chemistry. And in her ethos, in her dedication, in her spirit, she is basically, Western, sorry, Indian. I mean, sorry, this could be Freudian slip. Now, of all her books, I have chosen this book, Nationalism and the Imagination. It's a 2015 book, basically a lecture which has been published as a book, originally published in 2010 and then later in 2015. Now, here there are certain questions that he, as usual, gives rise to, critical theory, as ma'am, while introducing me, had said that critical theory is my area, and that way I would like to go with critical theorists. We believe more in raising questions than giving answers, problematization and reproblematization. Because whenever you give answers, you also create violence, epistemic violence. You close the problem. So that is the typical corporate style. Corporate bosses, what they tell, that okay, that is the problem. Now tell me the solution. We don't believe in that because there are many problems, there are gaps. So this is basically this nationalism and the imagination. Uh, there are certain problems that she raises, and one very important thing is that is related to today's topic is, what is Indian? I just saw, yes, there's a comment that followings of Said, that is true. Certain of their basic things, Bhava and Gayatri, they spring up from Said, but Said's also spring up from Foucault and Derrida. Orientalism itself is a kind of negotiation between a Foucauldian methodology of discourse and Gramscian methodology of counter-hegemonic practice. But what Said did not confess is that there is also a lot of Derrida there. But now here the thing is slightly different. Gayatri, for example, in this book, she is problematizing the very concept of Indian writing. It is not that she has done it for the first time or she is the first person to do it, but this is a problem. Today, we are talking about Indian writing in English, or say Indian writing, but how, to what extent does it represent India? The first speaker, of course, had given some excellent points. Now, here, Gayatri asks a scholar who is supposed to work on Indian literature and asks him on page 35, it is there, that which literature are you talking about? Are you taking into account the native literatures of India or Indian English literature? Then he says that I'm following Omid Choudhury's prescription. Omid Choudhury, if you remember, had infamously said that only Indian literature is Indian literature written in English. The others are regional. A very similar thing was said by Salman Rushdie, which had created a lot of problem. He had said, though we love Rushdie, but this cannot be forgiven. Without reading any indigenous Indian literature, he commented that, Indian writing in English are far more aesthetically satisfying and better in quality than Indian writing in native tongues. This is Macaulay's comment, if you remember, that a single shelf of a good European library is much better than all Indian and Persian and Arabic literature put together. So though they are Indian, Amit Chaudhuri and Salman Rushdie, and sometimes they fall back upon hybridity to justify their Indianness and other things. Indian subcontinent. Technically, he would be, Pakistani or whatever in Mumbai. But then basically the thing is that there is a kind of Eurocentrism, American centric. The same cannot, of course, be said about Amitav Ghosh. Anyway, so maybe, but there is no time. And then she says, uh, and he said, I'm following Amit Chaudhury's definition that only literature in English written on the subcontinent can qualify as Indian. How dangerous. So Amit Chaudhury's thing, because the rest are parochial, Amit Chaudhury said. Then Gayatri gives a counter question, and this is instructive for the students who basically do PhDs in English studies, because for last couple of years, we have fetishized diasporic writing. Under me also, under my supervision, two scholars have done. But what is diasporic writing, Gayatri counter? Isn't that also parochial? Because that same formula you give in everyone. That first homeland, hostland, first generation is Indian, then second generation more to hostland, and they are more, more. That is the foregone conclusion. Then you fit in Chitra Divakarani or Jhumpa Lahiri or Salman Rushdie there, like mathematics, A plus B whole square into square. So that is what is instructive. This was, and secondly, apart from that, I wanted to say one woman's thing also she has given rise to, and this is very important absence in Said. Though I worked on Said for my PhD, and he was my grand teacher in a way. He did not teach me directly, but I was fortunate to be taught by Professor Radhakrishnan, Said's direct student of California at Irvine. In India, he came for a course and for a long time, for almost 1 month together. But anyway, Said's main problem was Orientalism is gender blind. So Gayatri introduced the concept of gender to Orientalism and post-colonial discourse, and Bhava reciprocity. Because while you read Said, it appears that it is always a relation between the dominator and the dominated. But Bhava, so in a way, these are extensions. So here, Gayatri also says that in her observing the question of the nation, that nation's core base institution is the family, which is based on the role of women through their placing in the reproductive heteronormity that support nationalisms. So she has, generally she doesn't write very clearly, but basically because it is from a lecture, so this is instructive. And then it is about her discipline also, because we all know Edward Said and Gayatri Spivak were both comparatists basically by profession. They're professors of comparative literature, not English as such, but of course they're better than many professors of English put together. But anyway, Gayatri has been lamenting the death of comparative literature for quite some time, in particular, and humanities in general. The book in the question is The Death of a Discipline, but here she has clarified it more, and there is hope. She says that, the death of a discipline was not an obituary, that was an elegy. Only Spivak can do like that, the perfect Derrida after Derrida, because there's a difference between obituary and elegy. Obituary, you seal the epitaph and it is done, gone. Elegy, with every elegy, if we remember the classical pattern, Lycidas and other things, there's a hope that there will be a resurfacing. So here she expresses the hope that comparative literature will revive itself, and her specific instruction for Indian comparatives is that drop the Indian from comparative literature. It is like Said's telling in War, the Text and the Critic, that criticism specified, preceded by any adjective, so feminist or queer or whatever, is an anathema basically, because criticism is always a free engagement with countering the dominant discourses. The moment you qualify it with some adjective, that means you are going to question the flow of ideas or continuum only from a particular frame of reference, and then it no longer remains criticism. That is a major takeaway point from the War, the Text and the Critic. In the same way, Gayatri says here that drop the Indian from comparative literature, don't do Indian comparative literature, do comparative literature. Now my contribution to this is, these ideas are actually not totally her own. there are two ideas. One is size contrapuntal reading that he has introduced in culture and imperialism, which is in a way more important than Orientalism for certain reasons. Contrapuntal, counterpoint in Western music, one point, then another music. Like you must have heard the Shehnai when we have this Shehnai thing, Bismillah Khan and other. One keeps playing on a fixed tone, and then the other plays variations. So here the thing is that you have to read all literatures, not only English. That is what Said meant. And within English, you don't have any English literature as the background against which you read Chinua Achebe and all that we do till date. 80% of our course is English literature. Then as appendage or something, we include some post-colonial, some Indian, etc. That is not the idea. The first idea to decolonize is that you make it literature. So that Saidian idea is there. And the similar idea was given by Gungi Wathiongo in his book, 2012 book, Globalactics. Globalactics, contrapuntal reading, these two make into Gayatri's idea of planetarity. But again, I'll go a little further back in time. The great master here is Goethe, Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, whose idea of world literature was, even popular with Rabindranath Tagore, who made it Indian by giving the term Vishwa Sahitya. Anyway, but the main question is this book is about nationalism. Because I'm going to give you some kind of a thesis, when I'm doing this. The thesis is that it is partially borrowed from Frederick Jameson. I hope, all of you know that. His observation, again, infamous observation about third world literature, that all third world literatures are allegories of nation building, novels especially. And he was violently attacked by intellectuals, especially by our Ijaz Ahmed, somehow. But then I find great merit in the idea of, Jameson. So this was a 2015 book, so originally 2010. Then in 2016, two important books came out. I have read both. One is this one, What the Nation Really Needs to Know. It is published by JNU, a very good example of good prose writing in English, but it includes Hindi articles also on the problem of the, what they say, the current rise in neoliberalism and extreme right-wing thinkings against which JNU people gathered. And they not only gathered, there, of course, the dissonant voice will be of Makran Paranjape, we all know. But here, other people, though Paranjape is also included. It's inclusive volume. And I at this point I cannot choose anyone, but Gopal Guru's is a good one. What the Nation Really Needs to Know. It is quite accessible for students, I'm saying. You can buy and read. But again, surprisingly, in 2016 itself, another book came up from Shashi Tharoor, an era of darkness. If you want to ask me of representative books of Indian writing in English, these are thank you so much, sir. And then these are the books that I would recommend. Now here it is slightly counterintuitive in a way, uh, because it is known that in spite of its anti-colonial fight during the freedom struggle, the later phase of Congress has been more accommodative, and it is not dialectically or diametrically opposed to anything foreign, in spite of Gandhi's severe reservation. If you read Ashish Nandi and Nirotsi Chaudhuri, it is a side observation because they belong to the previous century. My topic is to end, but there's a continuum. They both say the same point, that Gandhi had been made rather a kind of appendage by the time India won freedom. He was sidelined by many of his admirers and lovers. Tactically, I don't want to name, but his assassination actually again gave him the status of the martyr that he deserved, but which possibly without the assassination he won't have. It's not what I am saying. Ashish Nandi has said it in The Politics of Assassination of Mahatma Gandhi, and Nirotsi Chaudhuri in his voluminous book. Now they have been Nehru and all have been quite westernized, pro-western. In fact, if we believe Nirotsi Chaudhuri, Nirod Babu was secretary of Subhash Chandra's brother, Sharad Bose, who was the president of Bengal Congress, Bengal Province Congress president. And he saw Nehru and others from close quarters. Nehru, in fact, even was dismissive of people who could not speak English with a British accent. So, generally, Congress is quite friendly with Western ideas and everything. And Shashi Tharoor himself is a great champion of Victorian or kind of high Victorian English. We all know his penchant for verbosity and all those things, pedantry. But the fact that he wrote a book indicting British Empire all the way is not personally surprising to me. Possibly he was trying to counter the surge in Indic nationalism which had come by the huge victory of Narendra Modi in 2015. This is my personal thesis. If you want to take it and build on it, please do. So this book is that, but I would just give one point to show that Tharoor has made what he wanted to do inside this book also. For example, by anticipating things that may come, he has categorically stated that the anti-sedition laws that Indian government follows is basically British colonial. That 1870, he wrote all that. But the question remains that why he did not write all these things before 2015. So this is page 104, the colonial thing, anti-sedition law and all that. Then this is not exactly a book on nationalism, I mean original book, but this is a collection. This is by Irfan Habib. Irfan Habib is a wonderful collection. It is quite I can say reasonable price, around 300. It includes all the major writings from Jyotiba Phule to Rabindranath Tagore, even Madhavendranath Roy. All these things are the all these things are, thank you so much for the kind comments. All these things are included in this. This is a treasure trove. And of course, he has a very good introduction. Now this year, I have come across, I haven't read it yet fully, but some of it I have read. I have come across a new kind of book, which has, of course, which these books have, and then something more. Because all the books that I have referred to till now, including Gayatri's book, they are quote unquote the left liberal kind of thing. And if you don't want the left liberal thing, I would say that they are driven by constructivism. In critical theory, everything is constructionist or constructivist. Constructionism is used more in education, and constructivism is what we use. That women are construct, men are construct, nation is a construct. So everything is construct, and with Derrida you deconstruct maybe. So, but then if you have to consider deconstruction is also a construction. So that construct, but you would be maybe surprised to know that this constructivism has great opposition not only from the traditional nativists, but from science also. But then again, the constructivists should see science itself as construct.
But Joydeep, deconstructionism has already gone to the winds, huh? Constructionism, deconstructionism has already gone to the winds. It is now no more.
Yeah. So now, no, in literature is actually, there is a continuum. So we still read Shakespeare, for example. That is the difference between computer science and literature. So in computer, we have say Windows have come, Java has gone. Not like that, but of course, Americans are more or less, Americanism is like that. If you publish a paper in America in 2020, you don't refer to a paper published till 2019, then your thing will not be, that is another problem. Americanism, and we with all our coursework and everything. So these are there, but of course I agree, deconstructionism's contextlessness has created a lot of problem, which has been balanced by post-colonialism and mostly ethical criticism, but maybe some other day. Today there is no time. Levinas and also Martha Nussbaum, these figures, I'm very much interested, but then later because they're not Indian. So, but then the book that I have in mind is this one, Nation, Nationalism and the Public Sphere. It's an edited book by Abhishek Roy and Ishita Banerjee Dubey. So they have, squarely caught the absences that were there in the books that I have previously referred to. That is left liberal or constructivist idea of nationhood. because they also take into account, it is not that they're vindicating, I mean, the essays that are included here, they're not exactly vindicating, but take into account the constituents of indigenous nationhood. Because contrary to what is said by the constructionists or constructivists, there are ample evidences of some kind of at least cultural nationalism covering almost today's India, all the parts, in things, dating as back as 2nd century AD. I always give reference to Vishnu Puran, which is a Gupta era text. It is succinctly has defined India as the land which lies to the south of the Himalayas, because are in the north, and to the north of to the north of the great ocean. That is the entire range comes, Uttaram yat samudrasya himadrishchaiva dakshinang varshang tad bharato namo bharati yatra santati. And yes, this is due to the selfie mode. I will, maybe if those who are interested, I will type the name of the books later and post it under the live channel. 5 books basically I have referred to. I'm not technologically pre-medieval. So anyway, this edited book by Abhishek Roy and Ishita Banerjee Dubey, and they raise some valid questions. One thing is, let us come back to Tagore. Of late, Tagore has been in a way hijacked by the quote-unquote left liberals. They quote only those portions of Tagore which are basically against nation. But it has also to be understood that Tagore's questionings or interrogations of the nation, first of all, was an interrogation of the Western nations, because he was writing within colonial times. He died in 1941. It cannot be said that even today in independent India he would have held on to the same kind of ideas. Even if he did, the second thing is that he was Tagore was not at all supportive of the communist things. He had gone to Russia on Lenin's invitation and praised certain things related to communism, but then also unpraised a huge lot. Basically, he was against any imposition of any system or on the human psyche, human soul, etc. So they have discussed it in this book. And then, for example, they say that India did not have any sense of a nation. So our editors have written that when Tagore says that, even then he presupposes a kind of a nation, because without that, this question may not have come. So this was more or less in the national scenario. If I would just like to take 5 minutes more, because possibly my time is coming to an end. In recent years, from the northeast of India, where I belong to, but I do not know whether all of us, we belong to any place or we do not. That is a philosophical question. Many good writings have come up, critical writings in prose, and of this, mention may be made of. Yeah, we are longing to belong. That is true, so Professor Ghanshyam. So this is, and yet another writer. Oh, sorry. Before I come to Assam, I contested F.R. Lewis in my papers and thesis, but here there is no other way than following Lewis in such a short time. Just as Lewis said that great English novelists are four: Jane Austen, George Eliot, Henry James, and Joseph Conrad. And that set the tradition of English teaching all over the world for a long time. The great tradition, 1948. So similarly, I say that the great Indian English prose writers are Vandana Shiva. I will start with Vandana Shiva, then Ramchandra Guha, then Arundhati Roy, and then, of course, Shashi Tharoor. These four, slightly leave aside. There are many more I'm leaving out. Now, the rest are already known, I think. Ramchandra Guha's works, all of you have been periodically reading, but still, I would name India After Gandhi, a marvelous work, inclusive work. This can be contested with one of his competitors. The book written by Mridula Mukherjee and others. Thank you. The one thing I like in Ramchandra Guha's book is that his inclusion of Bollywood and cricket. as markers and makers of Indian nationalism or creating India as a nation, but he leaves out the language question by and large, the problem that India had with language. So that is balanced in this book, India since India since independence. These two are the deal with the same subject but in a very different way. This is by three authors. And then Shashi Tharoor, all of you know one I have already shown, but why Bandhana Shiva is important? Because everything depends on life, and our life is heavily dependent on ecology. Bandhana Shiva has, almost single-handedly has been trying to fight both the industrial intrusion into nature and also the corporate co-option or corporatization of our indigenous agricultural system. And one of our most favorite concepts is what I want to discuss is earth democracy. Now, what is earth democracy? It is like deep democracy. The theorists will distinguish between democracy and deep democracy. We all say we are democratic. Why? Because you can give one vote and then great corporate capitalists or whoever, number one person of the country also can give one vote. So we are equal. Now, these democracy theorists call surface democracy because notwithstanding your ability to give one vote, you know, as against one vote of highly powerful people, in day-to-day life and every sphere there is an absolute mismatch. A poor person's power, his privilege can never equal that of a very rich person. So this kind of democracy is called surface democracy. And then another problem is surface democracy is majoritarian. 51% says this, 49% says that in parliament, so that will be passed. But true democracy is that when you hear the voice of even the weakest and the most lonely person. So we have to go deeply from one state to another. I'm not pessimistic. Overnight things cannot happen, but these ideas must come. So like deep democracy, Bandhana Shiva has spoken about earth democracy. She has borrowed the concept, based the concept on Indian tradition in Kautilya or Chanakya, who is often hated by many for his Machiavellian things, but there are many good things also. Kautilya had once said, which runs quite counter to the ideas of India being insular or Brahminical culture being insular. Kautilya said that this is my own person, that person is not my own. These kinds of thoughts are, you know, nurtured by mean-minded people. Of the broad-minded people, the entire earth is one family. It says, "Ayam nijo paro veti ganana laghu chetasam udara charitanam to vasudhaiva kutumbakam." Vasudhaiva kutumbakam means vasudha eva kutumbakam. So Bandhana Shiva has given reference to that the whole earth is a family and we are in a continuum. And of course, there is a book on eco feminism. A book has come on ecofeminism 2014. So the other authors we know, these are the 4 or 5 major authors according to me. Of course, what is missed out is more than what is said. Amitabh Ghosh I did not include because his prose works in the current century are not as voluminous as his fiction, and I'm not talking about fictional prose. Then if I come to Northeast, I was talking about a few good works have been coming up in recent times. So I would just like to refer to 2 or 3 works by wonderful works by Nandana Datta. One is Communities of Women. This is an edited book actually. So Communities of Women of Assam. She has, collected. This subtitle is Being, Doing, and Thinking Together. This is published by, Routledge, I believe in 2015 perhaps. So very recent. Now, this book has a wide range. It covers not only it covers the traditional roles and functions of women assessed against modernization, but also themes and themes as diverse as Assam Lekhika Sangstha, anxieties of lesbian life in Assam, and then mention must be made of a very interesting appendix that the book has. This is a selected translation from a
Dr.
book.
Jaideep,
Yes, madam. This is.
So sorry to
Yeah,
interrupt
yeah,
you, sir.
yes, sure.
Can
Yeah.
you please wind up because the
Yes.
panel discussion is also yet to begin, sir.
Yes.
The
So,
chairperson is waiting. Yeah.
yeah,
Thank
it
you,
has
sir.
a
Thank you.
translation from a cookbook, in a book of cooking and food, etc. So anyway, this was this was there, and also she has written widely on hybridity and challenges of Assamese identity while maintaining a consciousness of the other. There are also books by Sanjay Hajarika and Sanjeev Borua related to the Assamese identity, Northeast identity, which are very important, because we should bring these things to the fore. That maybe later, some other day, I will do on some other forum complete talk on the northeastern prose writing in English. Today I just initiated. So thank you all for your patient hearing, and thanks for the time and space given to me, and thank you so much. Please go on. I finish my thing here.
Very well explained. Very well
Thank you,
explained.
madam. Thank you, madam.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jaideep Chakrabarti, sir. It was an amazing way you have dealt non-fiction in Indian English, given an in-depth insight on various works to be read. The introduction of the concept of gender in post-colonialism by Gayatri Spivak, you have also explained it so lucidly. And with various examples, you have given and enhanced our knowledge and given a treat to the literature lovers. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you, sir.
And thanks for giving me space also, and thankful to the hearers, audience.
Now, it gives me immense pleasure to introduce the chairperson of today's panel discussion, Rajan Debnath, sir. Rajan Debnath, he is the principal of Henry De Rosio Academy, an English medium government CBSE senior secondary school. He holds a postgraduate degree in English and education. He has completed diploma in ELT from Hyderabad and diploma in school leadership from NCLS, Delhi. And he has a teaching experience of 24 years. I welcome you, sir. Rajanan
Yeah,
Debnath,
can you
sir.
listen to me? Can you listen to me?
Yes, sir. You are audible.
So, good evening, everyone. So, thank you so much, Dr. Meenakshi Kulkarni. First of all, let me take opportunity to thank iSPELL for having me here. Today, it was wonderful experience listening to Dr. Selvaraj, Dr. Pratibha Kumar, and Dr. Joydeep Chakraborty for throwing light on the tenets of English language and literature, and they have enlightened us in various possibilities. I was very keen to listen to them, and I am very happy to be here today. I am delighted and enlightened in possible ways. I would like to place my observation on esteemed speakers. Dr. Selvaraj threw light upon poet Sadashivan, prominent poet from Tamil Nadu, and speciality about his poetry and how it is relevant in Indian poetry. His poetry is about reflection on middle class intellectual and about self-analysis and questioning, and also gently searching for answers. Dr. Kumar has beautifully defined concept of mimicry and hybridity in very lucid language, citing examples from her own personal experiences and how mimicry and hybridity invoked in Indian writing. Dr. Chakraborty had a wonderful presentation, and we have come to know about some relevant books today. Again, I was so much lucky to listen to esteemed speakers and been enlightened and enriched. So thank you very much for such a wonderful sharing. I want to thank Dr. Patil, Madam, and Dr. Ghansham sir for giving me opportunity to share my views in iSPELL platform. Thank you very much.
Now will be the question answer session. We'll read out the questions from the chat box, sir. I'll just see if any question answers are there. For all the three panelists, it is, everyone is just praising that they are enlightened to be a part of this literary fest. You can even unmute yourself. Participants, you can please unmute yourself and directly ask the questions.
Can I make a comment on Dr. Chakrabarti's lecture?
Definitely, madam, please.
Yeah. It is just that we are talking about nationalism. And towards the end of the lecture, Dr. Chakrabarti were talking about Tagore's nationalism also. And you said that is a colonial response. Yes, I totally agree. But when Shashi Tharoor is also talking about a kind of, like you yourself had, you were a little skeptical about the objective behind Tharoor's writing. And also contemporary Indian writing in English, which I also pointed out, does represent Indianization of values. Are we moving towards a kind of a kultur or extremely nationalistic perspective, the intelligentsia of the country? What are your views? In non-prose, I mean, in prose we can, non-fiction we can take it up. How does an Indian writer represent Indian ideologies? Are we moving towards nationalism, the German model?
Thank you, madam. This is a very pertinent question, and in fact, to say the truth, I have not thought about it that way. Once you asked it, maybe now I'll think, but I have an answer for such questions from another perspective. I say it in quite a few places, possibly you will appreciate it. Though we are together due to English writing or whatever, and then basically, madam, what has happened is that India is such a vast country. And we say it is a continent actually masquerading as a country. And not only there are differences of class, communities, etc., but regions are very, very different. To be candid, majority of the northeastern states, there is an ideology, maybe except Assam, which was called the last outpost of Indian civilization and whatever, and Tripura to some extent, there has been an ideology that these things never formed part of India. I'm not going to say that, I'm not saying that this is valid or invalid, but what I'm saying is that, so it is very difficult to judge, but what I can see right now from the books that I have read or know about, or you have read or know about in the English languages, mostly say Arundhati Roy, those kinds of books, or Ramchandra Guha, they represent a kind of, what should I say, global nationalism in certain ways, maybe quote unquote anti-nationalism, but I believe they do not reflect the spirit of the general people or common people. And I forgot to add one thing, one reference I wanted to give. Tovish Khair had written a book you may have read or called Babu Fiction. About Indian English fiction. Long back, he was slightly skeptical. In that book, he has written in the dedication that the book is dedicated to, all those who cannot read Indian English, but whom Indian English claims to have read. That is, even majority of our people are not as such educated to read in their own language. Literacy and education, as you know, are two different. Literacy many have, maybe South a little more, and then to speak of English is very difficult. So I'm again, as you said, I'm skeptical about the representative value of the writings of nationalism in English, unlike those by Tagore, Aurobindo, Gandhi, or others, which reflected or which motivated the largest section of the people, Gandhi himself. I believe these days they are a minority, like Lewis said, my civilization. And so there are two different directions. I don't know. Would you like to say something more as senior and you must have thought about it?
I don't know. I was, as you were speaking, I was thinking about Manohar Malgaonkar and that book, Men Who Killed Gandhi. These thoughts were coming into my mind. And there is a shift between that kind of writing and what is being written now. And I was wondering, where is Indian prose going? What
Mhm,
does it symbolize now? I was just, these thoughts were happening as you were speaking.
mhm,
These thoughts were happening in my mind, and I realized there is definitely a shift in favor of nationalism in the contemporary, even Ramachandra Guha for that matter.
mhm,
When he was in Chennai, I attended his lecture, and he was speaking about how even this scheduled tribes and castes happened in 1965, and he was critiquing that. He was giving a critique of, but even that voice is off late, except Arundhati Roy, I think. Are we, the only fear is, are we moving towards nationalism of a different kind?
and that is the thing. Yes, to be clearer on this, it is true that unlike Arundhati Roy, Ramchandra Guha is also a nationalist, but he does not represent the nationalist, which is the current dominant discourse. I
Exactly.
cannot say more because we are
Exactly. Yeah,
central
I
and
understood. Yeah,
everything.
yeah, yeah.
So
Thank you so
yes,
much.
so yes, yes. So
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
a kind of extra kind of yeah.
Yes,
So
exactly. I can
yes, we have
infer.
some
Thank you.
restrictions. Yeah,
Yeah,
that
I
was
just
that is
want
the
to know.
Gandhian type inclusive nationalism, if we
Exactly,
say.
exactly. I
And
just want
now,
to know what you're thinking, and I understood. Yeah,
because
nice, nice.
we
Keep in touch. Yeah,
last year during this time, entire Assam was burning with car protest, and
right.
during that time, Ramchandra Guha was also arrested for protesting against car. But again, there within there is a difference. Pan-Indian parties like Congress and all, let me be in academics, we can say, non-BJP parties, they are mainly offended by the exclusion of the Muslim. Exactly. Whereas in the Northeast, in Assam, the issue is different. They don't want to include anyone, whether Hindu or Muslim, whatever, after 1971. So that is why, going back to my original point, and that India things are very so protest against Ka also in Northeast it is based on one thing, and all over India with the other national parties it is based on another thing actually.
Thank
So,
you, Dr. Chakravarti.
madam, thank you, madam.
Sir, I would also like to add with same thing with Sridevi ma'am. Like, what about nationalism when it is against humanism? Like, we are well aware with Hitler's uh, nationalism.
Madam, I don't know if the question is to me. That was the precise point of Tagorean nationalism in India. That he says that in my childhood I was taught that idolatry of the nation is greater than worship of God and humanity, and I am thankful that I have outgrown that idea, and I don't want any nation that is against humanity. But here we cannot, as humanists, of course we are from humanities and we have to be humanists. We of course will talk about humanity first and all that, but we have to also to understand possibly that there is a practical aspect to the running of the state policies. For example, this is a crass example, but I use it sometimes in my class. Withering away of the nation states is a good idea, but India should not do it first. Possibly, if we give up our statehood, then next day will be under the statehood of Pakistan or Russia or Britain again. So in that way, unless and until there's a global consensus, this withering of statehood or national boundaries will not work. We have seen the League of Nations fail, and uh, then this has also failed. This, what is that, United Nations, we saw during this vaccination time, it hardly has an effective power. So possibly I would favor a humanist nation if at all, but I don't think that is the way that is seen by the global leaders or as you know, the corporate capitalists who are said to be behind this nationalist politics everywhere. So I possibly don't have an answer as such.
Ghanshyam sir, can we take one last question? It is there in the chat box.
Yes, ma'am, please.
Okay. It is addressed to Professor Jaideep from Nurul Huda. Could you please throw some light on the concept of nationalism of Said?
Actually, Said's nationalism as such, I don't know whether this way is explained it. He basically fought for Palestinian nationalism against Zionism. And he was very liberal in other things, but he said, I would quote something from him, because you have been victims in the past, it does not mean that you can victimize other communities endlessly. This was addressed to the Jews, the Israelites, who were victimizing the Palestinians, according to Said. And otherwise, he is more in favor of a post-nationalist side. In 2001, he published a huge volume, Reflections on Exile, in which he categorically stated in the title essay that the modern civilization, modern culture is basically culture of the exiles. And then his favorite quote always is one by Yoga of Saint Victor. I would quote this. This is more like Tagore, but even beyond Tagore. Yoga of Saint Victor, the 12th century saint, if I remember, had said that the one who finds his own homeland dear is a tender beginner. To him, he to whom every place is equally dear is already mature, already strong, but that soul is perfect to whom every part of the world is a foreign land. That was Said's favorite quote. So I think even if he agrees with nationalism of some kind, non-hegemonic Palestinian, this is only as an initial condition. Finally, he believed in the exilic state and also spoke a lot about Adorno's idea of the transcendental exilic, and this quote of Yoga, Saint Victor's. Kindly read his Reflections on Exile along with his Palestine. It will be easily available.
Even Politics of the Dispossessed. That book.
Politics of the Dispossessed. Yes, Palestine work and all those work. Yes, after the last guy. Yes,
all his theories actually are born out of, he being a Palestinian Christian.
Yes, a minority within a minority. Yes, good
exactly.
But as I said, it is more like strategic essentialism. He finally won't believe in nationalism.
Exactly.
But right, I agree with you.
Thank you so much, sir. I would just request you, if you can just provide the list of books to all the participants afterwards,
yes,
to the organizer, to Ghanshyam sir or Patil ma'am. It will be really helpful for everyone.
Thank you, madam. I will give in the YouTube link. I can see already people are commenting, and I think all will see it sooner or later. So they are in the comment box. I'll give the list, or I can mail you also so that you can send up.
Thank you so much, sir. Now I request iSPELL President Dr. Jyoti Patil Madam to give the certificates to our eminent panelists. Madam, please do the honor.
Thank you, madam. Thank you. It was really a wonderful, awesome session with so much of knowledge. Knowledge was flowing like anything. All our speakers were excellent. They have contributed so much length and breadth of this Indian English literature. So Nuances actually has been taken to the height of many cornered things. So it's not really for us to encapsulate in one box only. So we need more sessions for this. And I'm really thankful to Sridevi Madam, who has immediately accepted our request. Just a minute, it's not working. Okay. Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, so it's visible now. Madam Sridevi, who has highlighted the contemporary English writers, poets in particular, about Sadashivan, she highlighted so many things, and her knowledge was reflected through her speech, and so many things to be discovered. we come to know about the Indian ethos and how this Indian reader is now focused in this. So thank you, Sridevi Madam. This is your certificate. It's visible, I hope.
Yeah.
Sridevi Madam? Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Pratibha Kumar Madam has contributed. Definitely, it was really icing on the cake, the way she has dealt with mimicry and hybridity, and we also come to know about reverse mimicry and reverse hybridity and many more things. So we know that we also expect most of our speakers to again add up to our knowledge individually, separately on our forum, because we are very much interested to know about the nuances of literature, and it's a forum where research on this in Indian English literature on different fields can be done. So thank you, Madam. Your
Thank you
lecture
so
was
much.
Pratibha Madam. Yeah. Yes, last but not the least, Jaideep Chakravarti has put an added dimension to this whole arena, and with lot much of references and books. I hope that people will chase you after your session. And yes, global ethics, and it is really a kind of thing we used to call it globalized word. So you made it a globalized word. Thank you, Jaideep Chakravarti, sir. Is visible to you,
Thank
Jaideep
you,
Chakravarti,
madam.
sir? Yeah.
Yes, madam.
Thanks a lot. And today's chairperson, Ranjan Devnath, I'm thankful to you, sir,
Thank
to
you.
see the time constraint and bundled up your observations so early, and I'm really thankful to you. This is your certificate. Yeah. And Meenakshi Kulkarni for being the Toastmaster of the whole show. I'm thankful to you as well, Dr. Meenakshi, the way you have conducted the program, Master of the Ceremonies. Meenakshi Madam, yeah. And last but not the least, Dr. Rakhi Makhija, who has started the show. You see, well begun is half done. And yes, all is well that ends well. So again, I will request Rakhi Makhija to conclude and propose vote of thanks with this. Okay, so over to Rakhi Makhija. Yeah.
Thank you, ma'am.
Yeah, please. Rakhi Makhija.
I would like to say thanks. I feel honored and I feel blessed by giving this opportunity by Dr. Jyoti Patil ma'am and Dr. G. Ghanshyam sir. I feel privileged. I feel privileged to thank all the resource persons for enlightening us, and to all the participants. All the discourses were so diligently deliberated, and we are very thankful to all the discourses. I'm thankful to Dr. Sridevi Salvaraj for rendering us with the Indian ethos of spirituality and Indian ethos of detachment, living in attachment, staying in attachment, and though detached. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much. And I would like to, I feel honored to thank Dr. Pratibha ma'am to render her deliberation on the topics of multiculturalism as mimicry and hybridity, and she has very beautifully dealt with reverse mimicry and reverse hybridity by giving an example of her personal life. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much. I'm privileged to thank Dr. Jaideep Chakravarti, who has given us a new idea of nationalism, where we can, there are lots of things we know from you and from your deliberation. I think all the participants are very enlightened by your discourse. I feel honored to thank our chairperson, Mr. Ranjan Devnath, who has very beautifully, who has given the summation of all the discourses by our eminent speakers. And I'm thankful to, I feel proud, I feel to thank Dr. Meenakshi Kulkarni, who has very profoundly and diligently taken up the event and profoundly dealt the question and answers to the speakers. Thank you, ma'am. And I would like to thank to Dr. Jyoti Patil ma'am, the president of iSPELL, and who has under whose supervision our iSPELL forum is expanding and spreading its wings. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. I would like to thank Dr. G.A. Ghanshyam sir for his guidance and support, and because of him, this forum has existed and gaining commendable job. Every session we encounter, and it is